Average Woodsman here, back with another video. So today I wanted to kind of go over 3 skills that could save your life in an extreme emergency. So this video is geared more towards people who are maybe beginners or people who are more novice. Maybe they don't even focus on that aspect of the outdoors. So maybe they're hikers or hunters, fishermen, people like that, backpackers who just like to be outdoors but don't have a lot of knowledge and don't have a lot of skills in the survival or bushcraft realm. So that's kind of what this video is geared toward. Now remember, a lot of these types of skills are perishable, so if you don't put in the dirt time and you don't own them, you don't master them, you can forget them. So I do believe it's important for, no matter if you're someone who is dedicated to this type of a lifestyle or if you're just someone who likes to be outside, out in the woods, you should still have at least a basic understanding of how to keep yourself alive in an emergency if that were to actually happen. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right. So one thing that I wanted to go over is how to correctly use a ferro rod. And yes, there is a correct way to use a ferro rod. I see a lot of people using ferro rods, not only on the internet, but you see them on television and things like that, and they're not using them correctly. There is a correct way to use a ferro rod. Now, one thing that you need to take into consideration is what your striker is going to be, what ferro rod you're using, and also what your tender is going to be. So whether that be natural tender like this or man-made tender, which honestly I would recommend for 99% of people, it's going to be a lot easier for them just to carry a man-made tender, whether that be tender quick tabs or something like that. You could even make tender at home, Vaseline and cotton balls, Neosporin and cotton balls. You can make aluminum foil nuggets, which, like I have a video, they're called fire envelope or aluminum foil nuggets. I have a video on that in a playlist on my YouTube channel. You can make them at home or you can buy them. It's totally up to you. But you need to still understand how to correctly use a ferro rod, no matter if you're using man-made tender or natural tender like this. So there are a couple different types of ferro rods. This one right here is a super inexpensive. This is a Light My Fire. This is a harder ferro rod, and there are softer ferro rods. The softer ferro rods are what most people prefer and what most people recommend. They tend to shower a lot more molting material. These ones, like this Light My Fire, for instance, they're a harder ferro rod, so you're not going to get as much off of each strike. Also, even though this is a really thick ferro rod and would last thousands and thousands of strikes, it's not very long, so you're not going to have as much surface area to strike when you're using this. So something like this, technique is even more important. And also another thing, all these ferro rods, they're all going to have magnesium in them. So you don't need to carry one of those big magnesium bars with the tiny little ferro rod that's completely useless on top of it. I recommend just carrying a good ferro rod, whether that be a Light My Fire or like an Ubeleben, or from any of the places you can find ferro rods. Just buy a decent one. They're not expensive, and learn how to correctly use it. Another thing, generally speaking, and this is not with everyone that I've used, but generally speaking, the handles on ferro rods will fall off. If you use this ferro rod enough, even the Light My Fire ones will fall off. I've had them fall off on me personally, and I've seen them in classes fall off while people are using them. So if you're to carry in your kit, you want to just carry some duct tape. And when this handle falls off, because it will inevitably fall off if you use it enough, just wrap it in duct tape and be done with it. If you want to buy some of the other ones, like the Ubeleben ones on Amazon, just wrap that handle in duct tape, or wrap that in duct tape, the end, use that as your handle, because now it's multifunctional. It's a handle and duct tape is a fire extender. So when you're using a ferro rod, the reason why I like to have a 90-degree spine on my knife is because this is my striker. This is what I'm going to use to strike a ferro rod, whether I'm pulling away or I'm on the edge guiding it into the tender bundle, the sparks. I like to have my 90-degree spine on my knife because it's so multifunctional. It can be used as a spoke shave to shave down tender. You can use it for your ferro rod. You can use it for a multitude of different things, so why not have it on your knife? If you don't have one on your knife, for whatever reason, maybe you're not carrying a knife, I recommend carrying something like a multi-tool or a Swiss Army knife, because on this you're going to have a saw, which is also multifunctional. You can use this to scrape a ferro rod if you absolutely had to. You can scrape a ferro rod with this. You can also use the awl portion on the back. This will scrape a ferro rod. I do not recommend, and this is just my personal opinion, I do not recommend using the blade of your knife. This is the most important tool that you have on you, and you may only have one knife. Do not use the blade of your knife to strike this ferro rod. You will damage it, and now you have damaged your most important tool, maybe your only tool. So it's really important to have either a dedicated striker or have something like an SAK or multi-tool or the spine on your knife to be able to strike your ferro rod. If you don't have something like this, and for some reason you didn't have a knife, you could always use a piece of broken glass. You can use a piece of flint or chert. This will work. It is not ideal, but it will strike a ferro rod if you absolutely had to. As you can see, it does not do nearly as good of a job as my knife, the spine of my knife, or the saw on my SAK. So this could be used in an extreme emergency, but it's not ideal. Same with glass. If you find a piece of glass, and you can find broken glass almost anywhere, it's just a fact of life. There's trash everywhere, even in remote location. Now remember, with natural tinder and man-made tinder, you're going to want to fluff it up. You want it to have a lot of fibers. You want it to be very fibrous, have a lot of surface area, because you're trying to get some of this hot material, this hot molting material, into those fibers, those dry fibers, to ignite this. So you want, even man-made tinder, you're going to want to fluff it up, whether that be something like a Tinder Quick Tab or Vaseline and cotton balls. Fluff those up before you strike your ferro rod. And with something like this, let me move this for 1 second. Something like this, the main technique that I personally use, and this is for something like a harder ferro rod and a softer ferro rod, I prefer to go ahead and put my knife up against my boot, lock it down, and then I'm going to see, there it broke. Right there. It broke off. What did I say? These break off all the time. And now I have no handle. Thankfully, I have duct tape. As you can see, now I have even a shorter ferro rod because I wrapped this in duct tape. This is not ideal. This is why I generally carry a long ferro rod, a very large ferro rod, because you get a lot more surface area, and the handles on these almost always break off. They're just glued on. 99% of them are just glued on. So, I like to personally put my hand up against my boot, locking down my knife, and I like to pull away. Remember, I'm not striking into my tender bundle. If I strike into my tender bundle, I am going to knock all this away. I'm going to strike into this, knocking all my tender bundle apart. And I'm going to use the entire length of it, especially when I only have this much. And I'm going to pull away. I'm going to pull away. I'm anchoring my knife in my hand up against my boot, and I'm pulling away. This will guide the sparks directly into my tender bundle. If you're one of these types of people who doesn't want to do that, you can always take this and strike into the tender bundle with your knife like this. This is another way, especially when you have a hard ferro rod like this. It's not soft. You can do that. Just strike it into the ferro rod, or into your tender bundle like this. This will also ignite tinder really well. There's another way that some people use, especially when they have longer ferro rods with more surface area. They'll push down into the tender bundle and scrape into it like that. Let's see, we can use something like this. They'll scrape into it using it like this. I'm not personally a big fan of that because you end up knocking into your tender bundle a lot, but if you want to try it like that, you can do it like that also. Those are really the three main techniques that most people use. Go ahead and plan our hand with our knife, and we're going to go right into the tender bundle. It's been really wet out here. We had the Hurricane Helene. We've just had a lot of rain in general, so a lot of stuff is out here is really wet. So that can also hinder your ability to start a fire in an extreme emergency. But we should be good. I found some pretty decently dry tinder, and I found some pretty decently dry wood, so we should be fine. So next I'd like to show you guys how to filter water if you don't have a water filter with you, like an actual dedicated one, like a Katadyn or a Sawyer or a Grail or something like that, and you don't have a metal container to boil water in. You always want to carry some sort of water filter or a metal container to boil water in, or preferably both if you can. But say you were caught in a situation where you didn't have any and you were able to come across, or maybe you had a water bottle on you, you could technically tie this and hang this over a fire filled with water, and it will boil water. Now remember, if you're worried about any type of plastics leaching into the water, you're burning this bottle with water inside it. So it's going to leach plastics into the bottle or into the water. But in an emergency, when you're more worried about dying of dehydration, that's probably going to be the last thing on your mind. But for this, let's say this bottle is damaged. Let's say it has a hole in it. So you can actually do that. So another thing you could do is go ahead and cut this bottle in half. You could cut this bottle in half, and I'm going to show you guys how to make a filter with an item that you're going to have on you already, with items off the landscape or material off the landscape that you guys can use to create a filter to filter water, especially large sediment, out of water into this. What I'm going to use for this specifically, I'm going to layer it. I'm going to use charcoal as my bottom. I'm going to use the next layer sand, and then the top layer I'm going to use pine needles. You could use grass, you could use gravel, you could use rocks, tiny pebbles and things like that from around the river or a creek. Whatever you have on hand is what you're going to want to use. Specifically, I have the charcoal from the fire, and I have lots of pine needles, I have lots of grass, and I have lots of sand. So I could use those things to make this layered. That way when I pour my water through, it filters out that larger sediment and that flavor and that discoloration. All right, after you fill it up with the charcoal, we're going to go with sand now. And last, I'm going to shove a bunch of pine needles in here. Like I said, you could use grass for this portion. You could use all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to use pine needles for this last part. All right, so we made ourselves a tripod. I did not tie these together. I rolled the sock down, and I just placed each one of these poles into the rolled up sock, which hangs it. You don't need any cordage for this, okay? Now, we're going to place our clean container underneath here. We're going to want to slowly pour our contaminated water into this, and it's going to start to filter through, and it's going to start to drip into our clean container at the bottom. It's going to take a while for it to filter through, but once it starts filtering through, you're going to see the color difference between this water and the water that drips out at the bottom. Alright, so you're going to want to find a relatively level area. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want the stick to be as straight as possible. You're going to push it into the ground or hammer it into the ground depending on where you're at. You'll notice that right away it's going to cast a shadow. You're going to want to put something, whether that be a rock, I'm just going to use a pine cone because that's what I have, at the very tip of that shadow. Now we're going to wait 15 or so minutes. We'll come back and we'll put another pine cone at the next interval of that shadow where it's moved. Now remember, the sun, it rises in the east and sets in the west. So I'm going to show you guys that. Let's wait a few, come back, we'll go ahead and put a pine cone at the second one, and we'll move on from there. Hey guys, so as you can see, this has moved, I don't know, probably close to a foot now. And we're going to go ahead and place another pine cone here to mark this spot. What I like to do is take a stick or something and create a line in between the two, and then about a foot out from this one. All right, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to place your left foot at the beginning of where your original pine cone was or is, and then you're going to want to put your other foot at the end of the line that you drew. Then when you point it in this direction, this is going to be north. So now I know that this is north, this is south behind me. All right, so as you guys can see, it's not exactly, but it's pretty dang close, within a few degrees. So in an emergency situation, if you did not have a compass, you can use the sun, and you can use a stick, and you can use shadows to get a general idea of north-south. All right, guys, so that's the video. I just kind of wanted to go over these skills and show you guys them, just in case something were to happen, that you could have them in an emergency, and honestly, they could save your life. Knowing how to find north, south, east, west, knowing how to filter water with just basic items off the landscape, knowing how to correctly use a ferro rod so you can actually start a fire if you absolutely had to. So these types of skills, to people who have spent a lot of time out in the woods, you know, have been practicing bushcraft and survival and wilderness living and things like that for a long time, they might come second nature, or you think that they're not really that big of a deal anymore because you learned them years ago, because they're pretty basic, most of the skills. But knowing how to correctly use a ferro rod can legitimately save your life in an emergency. That's why I wanted to make this video for my audience specifically, and people who might come across this video. It is, first off, they're interesting and they're fun to do, they're fun to learn, and they have practical uses in the real world. Anyway, remember to like, subscribe, share these videos with your friends and family. Be safe, stay dangerous, and I'll catch you on the next.